Next time you're in Dollar Tree, grab a bottle of their Mod Podge. And while I was here, I decided to grab a pizza pan because, believe it or not, one thing I haven't decoupaged yet is one of these. People, we're gonna have to just skip the editing real quick. Listen, what is this? What is this made of? Oh my god. I'm just gonna paint over it, okay? We won't talk about it because I don't have no glue gun. Since we're going to be decoupaging on metal, it's important that we use a paint to prime our piece that we know is going to stick to that material really well. If you don't have access to a DIY retailer, here are two other options I have used many times that I can pick up from Walmart, and the folk art I can usually grab from Hobby Lobby if you have one of those local to you as well. For this project, I decided to go with this because I know it works really well against metal, and if you're ever interested in trying out some DIY paint, or looking for a retailer, my friend Sammy at Unicorn Dust Designs sells it. I usually keep a link down in the description box. And on a side note, people, look at the size of this pouncer I had in my stash. It took me just a couple minutes to get the first coat on this pizza pan. Whenever I'm painting on metal or glass, I always like to use a pouncer or a sponge. And then I tappity tap 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 the product all over our project. And usually it takes one or two coats and I get a really nice coverage instead of painting it. And a quick little tip I want to share with you, this works for glass or metal. You want to take your finger and scrape along the paint, making sure it is attached before you start decoupaging anything. If you notice with those tiny little scrapes that your paint is coming up, your Mod Podge is probably not going to stick to the surface as you're decoupaging. You're going to have some separation. So do one of two things. Apply another layer of the paint that you're using and allow that to dry, or switch up the paint because the paint you're using might not be made for that surface. And in some cases, it also might not be fully dry. In worst case scenario, you absolutely do not have access to the paint. You can use Rust-Oleum Clear Matte spray paint, seal over it, let it dry. That has worked for me in a pinch, but brushing on sealers with paint that doesn't stick to those materials can be tricky, so just be careful. How about this napkin, people? Isn't it pretty? This was sent to me by a subscriber. Thank you so much. I am so excited to be using this on our pizza pan, and yes, it fits perfectly, but we got to trim it down to size. And there are so many ways to do this, but for this particular project, I'm just going to flip the napkin on the back side so we have a nice clear visual of where the pencil marks are going to be. I decided I am going to keep this very clean cut and I'm not going to add anything around the border, so I want this as precise and as perfect as I can get it. I made sure to hold my one hand and my arm kind of over the napkin as much as I could so it didn't move around while I was doing this. Then when I was happy with the circle I made, I tore a little corner to reveal the top decorative layer and then sectioned it enough apart that it went over the piece that we're going to be pulling apart before I started cutting. And then I just cut the entire circle out and peeled the top layer off. I was worried that if I waited to pull the sneaky layer off the back after I trimmed this down that I might have ruined a side, and I needed it perfect. And I needed to leave that extra ply on there so I could see the pencil mark. I didn't want to pencil the back of the decorative layer because the napkin was so dark. I knew I wasn't going to be able to see it to cut the perfect circle. For our application, I'm going to use a fan brush. This is just my go-to whenever I'm decoupaging a napkin. It just works best for me. By all means, use whatever you would like. I made sure the napkin was in the exact spot that I wanted it and then peeled a section back. I applied a little bit of Mod Podge and then started spreading out a very small section. There are a ton of ways to decoupage and there are a lot of decoupage artists. I like to believe that the things that I share in my content, doing this for so long, are just things that work best for me, and I like to share them hoping they help you at home. And one way I found that really reduces your wrinkles on your napkin projects is to do a tiny bit of Mod Podge and then to press down your napkin gently over it. If you oversaturate your piece with a ton of Mod Podge, because I know it feels like you need a whole lot to get it to work, it's possible it's going to create wrinkles. But in the event that I do have too much Mod Podge in certain sections, I like to use a dry sponge. I usually get these in a pack from Walmart and I'll cut them down in size and just push down in the sections. This helps to absorb any extra Mod Podge that may be there into the sponge, and it also helps to flatten out your piece in the exact spot without smearing it back and forth. Sometimes when I use cling wrap, it will tear my napkin. Once your sponge gets all crusty musty, sometimes after you've used it a bunch of times, you will notice it starts to get hard. The Mod Podge will harden it. I'll then cut that sucker up and reuse it to apply paint on different things. And then I just flip my napkin the opposite side of where I've applied it and continue the same method until I have a complete application. Now, while this is drying, you can take the opportunity to cut up your florals or paint any extra pieces that you want to attach to your pizza pan. If you want to put a layer of sealer over this, once it is all dry, you go right ahead before you apply on your florals and ribbons and things like that. This would also be perfect with a little hanger for you to hang on the wall, or just leave it to sit around your home. For this decoupage pedestal stand, we're gonna need to start off by grabbing us a Dollar Tree basket and one of these industrial candle holders. For the top of the tray, we're gonna need a round or an oval piece. I didn't have any at my local Dollar Tree. This was in my stash, so I'm just gonna roll with this. I want to do the iron-on method to the top of this piece, so I'm taking a lot of Mod Podge and applying it to all the sections of this round piece that I want it to attach to. If you want a nice crisp line around your edges where you separate the piece you're decoupaging, make sure to take your time and apply nice thick layers all around the edges. When your piece looks like this, set it off to the sides and let it dry for a couple hours naturally. For our decoupage portion, we're going to be using this beautiful decoupage tissue paper. Over on my Facebook page, I do have a TDS community group where we just share all things related to crafts and decoupage and TDS. I put out a little poll over there and asked them what section of this paper that they like the best, and the section we're going to decoupage on the top of this won. And for anyone wondering what is TDS, it stands for the DIY Struggle. It is my brand, and over on my website, thediystruggle.com, I have a decoupage paper line with over 40 designs for you to choose from, a transfer line, small rice paper prints, and digital downloads. A question I get asked a lot is if you can iron on tissue paper, and that is why I wanted to do this particular project, is to show you that you absolutely can. I want to save as much of this paper as possible, so I decided to just trace around the part that I wanted, and I just cut that out. Now it's time for us to bring on in our iron. This little sucker usually sits right next to me at the craft table. It is not the exact iron that you have to use for projects like this, so please don't feel like this is the only iron. You can use whatever iron you would like. I do turn mine all the way up before I begin. You're going to want to make sure to grab you some parchment paper. This is going to help you apply your piece. It's going to protect your paper from getting any possible burn marks from the iron. It's also going to help reduce any ability for your iron to stick to your paper or to the project if there's Mod Podge around it. The parchment paper does a multitude of things. I also get asked very often, can you use wax paper? Wax paper is not heat resistant. Wax paper is mostly used to stop as like a non-stick surface. Parchment paper is heat resistant, so it does make a little bit of a difference. Now, I'm not saying I've never used wax paper in a pinch, but you know, parchment paper is what you're supposed to use. And one rule of thumb that I kind of try to follow whenever I'm doing this method is to pick a side and go from one side to the next. This will help prevent any bubbling up in the center. When you're all done, check around the edges to make sure everything's attached, and then get a little piece of sandpaper and go around sanding. I like to just go straight down with my sandpaper just in case anything isn't attached around the edge. We don't have any bunching and can fix that. Once your piece is completely dry, if you want to put some sealer over it, you go right ahead. Make sure you do little thin layers instead of going in heavy. It's going to help reduce wrinkles as it dries. Now it's time to assemble our piece. You can leave your basket in the shape that it is, but I wanted mine a little bubbly, and this stuff is easy to manipulate. So I just made mine look like this, and then I flipped it over on the bottom and grabbed the top of our tray and put it into place. I flipped it upside down and then grabbed this little wood piece. You could use whatever wood piece you want as long as it fits on top of our little industrial candle holder here. I'm using tacky glue and hot glue to be able to attach this to the metal basket and have something solid for our metal candle holder to attach to. You can skip this next part if you want to, but I wanted to add some fairy lights, at least for the staging purposes, and an extra idea because it looks so amazing. You can remove this, obviously, if you just tape it in here. Feel free to glue yours down. Take the idea and remix it into whatever works for your home decor. I absolutely just think this idea is so amazing. Look how awesome this looks. For this little riser, we're going to be taking one of Dollar Tree's scrap wood pieces and doing a napkin iron-on decoupage method to it with the natural wood. You can absolutely paint your piece up if you want. Your napkin design will pop more, but I love sharing how you can use pieces in their natural state to look like it's blended into the wood. To get started, go ahead and throw a nice healthy layer of Mod Podge all over your piece of wood. When it looks like this, set it off to the side to dry naturally for a couple hours. Then pick your napkin, my friends, and you're gonna need to get that top decorative layer away from that sneaky underneath layer. There are several different ways to remove your napkins. One of the easiest is just to tear a corner. Usually it reveals the sneaky under layer and I can just pull them right apart. Now it's time to bring in the iron and make sure to grab you some parchment paper. You're going to want to put that right over top of your napkin. Pick an end and slowly push the iron back and forth, moving from one side to the next. This is just going to help push any possible bubbling or wrinkling all the way to the other side. So instead of going all around the edges and then coming back to the middle and possibly having some bubbles, it just eliminates that. Before you start removing the excess napkin, just go around the edges and make sure it's all completely attached. I'm just taking my finger sander and going straight down to pull all the excess napkin off. Now I want to round off those edges. This is going to really allow that napkin to completely look blended into that piece of wood. And I do not recommend doing this if your napkin is not completely on your piece of wood. It is going to just ruin your piece. For the legs of this little riser, I'm just going to be using some of Dollar Tree's little Christmas trees. Use whatever you would like for your legs. I'm also going to be creating a smidge of an ombre look with some antique Waverly wax so that the bottom is slightly darker as it blends to the top. Just a cool little aesthetic accent to this piece. And then I'm taking some tacky glue and attaching all of them to the bottom. I allowed this piece to dry completely overnight and then came back in with some of Mod Podge's hard coat. This stuff is water resistant, so in the event if we want to put it in the bathroom or the kitchen, we are protected. And a good tip to help reduce any further wrinkling, even after this is dry, apply your sealer in thin layers. If you're looking for more Dollar Tree inspiration, check out this video right here. As always, thank you all for hanging out with me, and until next time, bye!